Today on Madden 25, I'll be going over 10 players who you need to trade for in your Madden franchises, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. There's going to be a part 2 to this in which I go over 10 players on defense who you should trade for, and that video will be in a card at the top right of your screen if it's been uploaded by the time you're watching this. The 10 players I chose today I found were pretty easy to get considering how good they are right now, along with how they progress into the future. I did 2 5-year simulations so that way we could have data backed up by science. These are the XP sliders that I'm going to use for the video today. I used these in my franchise mode last year, and I plan on doing so again this year. I feel like these sliders properly show progression and regression at certain positions, especially offensive skill position spots. I feel like running backs and receivers play really well into their 30s in this game, which usually is not the case in real life, and this way regression is a lot more ruthless for offensive skill guys, as it usually is in real life. I ended up using the team randomizer to pick my team for today's video, and ultimately it would land on the Atlanta Falcons. So they're going to be the guinea pig for us today, and we will be making all of our trades with them. I wanted to make sure that I'm not giving away any valuable assets in these trades. I'm not going to be dealing any first or second round picks or any super valuable players, just to show how easy it is to get the guys we're going to go over today. And just to be clear, these trades are not meant to be realistic. For those of you who want more of a realistic style franchise, the Denver Broncos series I'm running is definitely for you, because that series is all about realism. Today's video, not so much. So I felt like I had to include a quarterback on the list, and it's a little bit ironic that we're using Atlanta because the player that I'm targeting is Desmond Ridder. And you're probably thinking, why should I trade for Desmond Ridder? He's pretty bad. Well, in Madden, that's actually not the case. 25 years old, star development, and he's got really solid ratings at the most important spots. You won't have to give up anything of significant value. All it's going to cost is a 31-year-old corner on the roster bubble. So as you can see here in the first simulation, he's developed pretty well into the 80s, but he actually plays a lot better than that in Sim. Over the last 3 years as a starter, he's finished with a passer rating above 100, at least 30 touchdowns. 1 year he had almost 40. The interceptions are a little bit high, but otherwise, those are top 10 quarterback stats. In the second sim, he definitely did not develop as well. I think part of it is that the Raiders playbook is pretty pass-friendly, so you might get some hit-or-miss results with Desmond Ridder, and you should not expect him to be Patrick Mahomes, but considering the price, you could be getting a starting-level quarterback. We've got 2 running backs on the list, the first of whom is probably the best player we're going to be going over today. Jalen Wright is a guy who kind of made the honorable mentions and would be a good candidate to make this list. But if you want to shoot for the stars, De'Von Achane is a great choice. Only 22 years old, the fastest running back in the game. And if you play your franchise games, there aren't many backs in the league who are going to be more OP than De'Von Achane. He develops pretty well in Sim as well, and he's a lot easier to trade for than other running backs who are similar in terms of talent level. Now, we are going to have to give up Grady Jarrett, who's a pretty good player, but he's also older, and we have young defensive ends already on the roster. Grady Jarrett is the only quality starter who I had to deal away in this video, trading him a 3rd and a 5th to get De'Von Achane. This is certainly the most expensive deal we're going to make in today's video, but I think it's worth it considering how well De'Von Achane develops. In this simulation, he's a 91 with superstar development, the 7th ranked running back in the game. The numbers here are pretty solid across the board. Double-digit touchdowns twice, over 1,000 yards 4 times, and fairly efficient. In the second sim, he's the 5th ranked running back in the game. So regression really isn't going to hit him until he's 28, 29 years old. Again, pretty solid numbers across the board. The other running back we're going to target is Dameon Pierce. He's another guy who's very hit or miss in Madden simulation, but so far in Madden 25, I've only seen good things from him. I've always preferred having more power backs when I do simulation franchises, and Dameon Pierce is exactly that. Very different to a guy like De'Von Achane. Considering he is the Texans' backup, he's really not going to cost that much. Now, they are super interested in Arnold Ebiketie, who is a somewhat valuable young player for this team, but Ebiketie has more trade value than Dameon Pierce, so we're going to try to sneak out some extra picks in this deal as well, and since we have Zach Harrison, there is a developmental player behind Ebiketie, and it's really not the end of the world that we would be trading him away. So I added 2 backups, and I'm going to be getting a 3rd rounder back, which basically offsets the pick that we used to get Devon Achane. I basically traded Grady Jarrett, Arnold Ebiketie, and some depth for 2 good starting running backs. I know his rating doesn't look that good here in the first sim, only a 77 overall, but keep in mind he's already begun to regress, and as a 29-year-old, regression will be hitting him fast, but his numbers over the last 2 years are really good. The problem is he was quite bad at the beginning of the simulation, so it might take a little bit for him to become good, but once he does, he usually outperforms his overall rating. In the second sim, I feel like he had more success. Double-digit touchdowns 3 times. He was super efficient the final 3 seasons, including 4.7 yards per carry in the final year as a 28-year-old, as he was already beginning to regress. As for the wide receivers, I feel like the data from the 2 simulations really doesn't matter as much here because wide receiver stats are very playbook dependent rather than, say, based on how good they actually are. I put Christian Watson and Kadarius Toney in the Vikings playbook, for instance, and they both developed quite well. They both had multiple 1,000-yard seasons. Toney almost had 3. And the reason why I chose those 2 players is because those are the first 2 guys we're going to go over. We'll start with Christian Watson, who's in a very deep wide receiver room in Green Bay. There are some other good choices here. Jaden Reed develops well. Dontavion Wicks probably isn't super hard to get. But neither is Watson, who's 25 years old with star development. He's fast, he's big, and again, if you play your games, this is somebody who can really outperform his overall rating. All we have to do is give up an okay young player in Nate Landman, who doesn't have the dev trait, along with a 5th and 6th rounder. I feel like that's a steal for Watson. Even though regression has hit him hard here in these long-term simulations, I feel like his rating is this low because he was never a consistent starter. Here in simulation number 1, he started for 2 seasons and then was a backup over the last 3. In the second simulation, it's much of the same. He played a little bit more this time around, but if you actually use him and progress him, regression won't hit him like a truck, as we saw with the simulation earlier when he was using the Vikings playbook, which is the most pass-happy playbook in the game. As I mentioned, Kadarius Toney is the other guy to look out for. I know a player like Xavier Worthy would be really fun. Rashee Rice is also quite good in this game, but Kadarius Toney is significantly easier to trade for. And while he is quite bad in real life, he's pretty good in Madden. 25 years old, star development, pretty fast, dynamic with the ball in his hands, solid catching stats. His route running stats really aren't horrible either. And he's got decent size at 6 foot, 200 pounds. You're not going to have to give up that much for him, considering the amount of talent that the Chiefs have on their receiving core. 2 backups and a 3rd for Kadarius Toney and a 5th. Very similar with Christian Watson. He begun to regress quite hard in the 2 simulations I did, but that's mainly because he was never a full-time starter. In simulation number 1, he's only a 71 overall, which obviously is not particularly good, but he only really was a full-time starter once, that being in 2026 with New Orleans. In the second simulation, much of the same. He progressed a little bit better this time around, and he played a little bit more here, had a good season in 2027, but that was the only time he averaged over 30 yards per game. The next player we're going to go over is someone who's a little bit better than those 2 guys, that being Jameson Williams in Detroit. JMO is 23 years old, star development, 98 speed, and stands at 6 foot 2. If you play your games, this is a guy who's going to be a cheat code. And even if you don't play your games and simulate in your franchises, he's a lot cheaper than he should be considering how good he is, his age, and his development trait. Caden Ellis is a pretty good linebacker, but he's 29 years old and not even an 80 overall. Along with him, we traded Kevin King and 2 day 3 picks. That feels like a steal for Jameson Williams, who develops pretty nicely. And again, if you use a pass-happy playbook and give him the ball a lot, he's going to progress even better than this. And he's still an 86 overall here and the 23rd best receiver in the league, which is pretty good considering we traded 2 backups and 2 day 3 selections. He didn't quite do as well in the second simulation I did. He's only an 82 overall, but he's still the 34th ranked receiver in the game. If you utilize him a lot, he should be at minimum a top 20, maybe even higher than that, wide receiver in the entire league. And for that price, it's so worth it. Jahan Dotson is the final wide receiver we're going to go over. Very similar to the other guys. He's young, he's got star development, and he's a little bit less than an 80 overall. The price for him, like some of the other guys we just went over, is really not that much. It's really going to cost a few mid-round picks, but I'm sure there's a way we can make it a little bit cheaper, and I found a really good deal. Lorenzo Carter, Ray McLeod, a third, a sixth, and a future fourth gets the job done. Outside of the third rounder and maybe the fourth, this really isn't a whole lot, and if you feature Jahan Dotson in your offense, he should progress quite well. Better than he did, again, in the 2 simulations. Here in the first one, he is the wide receiver 1 in Washington. I would guess his peak was probably around an 84, 85 overall before he regressed. So that's what you should expect at the bare minimum if he's only going to be featured as the wide receiver 2 or 3. If you utilize him more, he'll probably end up even better than that. Here with the Eagles in the second simulation, I think he's the 48th ranked receiver in the league, so he's a very solid wide receiver too, and you're getting a really good deal with him. Tight end is very similar. It's very playbook dependent. Regardless, Isaiah Likely is a great player to trade for considering he's behind Mark Andrews. Likely has good athletic ratings, he's only 24 years old, he only has star development, and he is really cheap. I'm pretty sure the Ravens are usually going to have him on the trade block, so because of that, it's not going to cost much. Maybe a few day 3 picks are going to get the job done. I think we can do even less. 2 backup guards, a 59 and a 60, along with a 5th rounder is all it takes. In the 2 simulations, Isaiah Likely ended up being okay. In the first sim, he's a 77 overall, fringe starter, nothing spectacular, but he never played. So this is his development with never seeing the field. So if you utilize him, he's going to get the ball a lot more. In the second simulation, he did play a little bit. He's an 81 overall, pretty much a fringe starter at the tight end position. And when he actually played, he usually plays better than his rating suggests. But the Chiefs playbook is usually the go-to if you really want to focus on developing your tight end. In both simulations, Jared Wiley turned into an absolute monster. 84 overall in the first one, and in the second one, he was a 90. Jared Wiley is rated lower than Isaiah Likely. I believe he only starts with normal development. So because of that, if you put Isaiah Likely in the Chiefs playbook, he's probably going to fare even better. So that's exactly what I did. I went into a fantasy draft with the Chiefs, I drafted Isaiah Likely, and I put him in the playbook. He's an 87 overall, 88 with a morale boost, which is the 11th best tight end in the league. His numbers across the 5 years are all really solid, and keep in mind this is not with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, which Jared Wiley did have that luxury. 3,000-yard seasons, 3 double-digit touchdown seasons, and made the Pro Bowl all 5 times. That's pretty good. We have 2 offensive linemen on the list, the first of which is DeJuan Jones with the Browns. He's technically a backup, being behind Jack Conklin, and we're going to take advantage because he's the 22nd ranked right tackle in the NFL, but he's only 23 years old and has star development. The price on him is really not that high. 3 backups, 2 of whom are older than the age of 30, along with a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th. And keep in mind, all of these draft picks are in 2027. So if you use picks that are in next year's draft, you're probably not going to have to give up this much draft capital. It's just that we're running out of mid-round picks because we've used a lot of them in other trades today. DeJuan Jones developed into a beast in the first simulation, going up to an 85 overall, and he's really not going to start to regress over the next 5 years considering how young he is. He's the 10th ranked right tackle in the game. His run blocking stats look awesome here, and his pass blocking production's pretty good. Only 7 sacks allowed in the last 2 seasons. In the second simulation, not quite as good, but still solid. He's an 82 overall, the 17th ranked right tackle in the game, but his sack numbers are arguably even better here. He never let up double digits once with a career low of 5. The next offensive lineman we're going to talk about is Tanner Bortolini with the Indianapolis Colts. He's the only player in today's video without having at least star development, and he's the lowest rated player, is only a 70 overall. So this is a real hidden gem, but he develops very nicely in Madden franchise mode, and with his athleticism, you can place him at different spots on the offensive line. You don't have to trade anything for him. A 31-year-old backup receiver or 2 guys who you were probably going to cut, and you're going to end up with a quality starter. In simulation number 1, he's an 82 overall, and at 27 years old, there's still a little room to get better. He's right around the 16th ranked center in the game, but he plays better than that. He doesn't let up sacks, and he's a pretty good run blocker. In the second sim, he's also an 81 overall, the 15th ranked center in the game. His strength rating is kind of low, but otherwise he checks the boxes. Never let up more than 5 sacks in his 4 seasons as a starter, and it's not that he's not playing, it's that he's just that good of a pass blocker. So that's going to wrap up the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope this helped you guys figure out some players who you should trade for in your franchise modes. Again, make sure to check out the defensive player version for this. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.